All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really intense conversation, specifically a recent interview between Lara Trump and a Republican Congresswoman. What we're going to do here is step back and impartially examine their arguments around gender ideology and sports fairness. We're going to use their own words and perspectives to really understand the foundation of their platform. So how exactly are they taking these specific concerns, especially regarding the definition of a woman and the concept of biological sports fairness, and translating them into a grassroots political strategy? Because as you'll see, this isn't just some philosophical debate, it is quite literally a blueprint for political mobilization.
To make sense of it all, we're breaking this down into 5 quick themes. First, the value of motherhood. Second, the sports fairness debate. Third, the Women's History Museum. Fourth, forming a political army. And finally, number 5, the local election focus.
Okay, starting us off with Section 1, the value of motherhood and defining the cultural baseline. According to the interview, both of these speakers ground their entire political and cultural argument right here. They view motherhood as fundamentally important and empowering. Actually, Lara Trump explicitly states there's absolutely no title more important to her than mom. And it's super interesting how they use this strict biological definition of womanhood to draw a really sharp contrast with their political opponents. During the conversation, they specifically criticize a Supreme Court justice whom they claim literally couldn't define what a woman is. So for these speakers, establishing this firm biological definition, that's the mandatory starting point for every single policy argument that follows. Moving right along to Section 2, the sports fairness debate. Why biological fairness matters. Now, we get to their core policy grievance. The speakers argue forcefully that allowing biological boys into girls' locker rooms or competitive sports is just deeply and fundamentally unfair. The Congresswoman points to the fallout. We're talking thousands of lost scholarships, lost podium spots, lost titles, and lost records that she claims have basically been taken from biological girls. But they actually take the argument a step further than just competitive fairness. They argue this trend is physically dangerous, citing claims of countless female athletes being severely injured by having to compete against biological males. So for this explainer, we really need to understand that when they talk about why biological sports fairness matters, it's not merely a talking point. They present it as an urgent, absolute issue of safety and equal opportunity for female athletes. Which brings us to Section 3, the Women's History Museum and legislative clashes over language. So, how does this ideological divide actually play out in Washington? Well, the Congresswoman details a bill, one pushed by Representatives Nicole Meliadakis and Elise Stefanik and backed by Donald Trump to establish the National Women's History Museum. It was supposed to honor women's historical contributions, but the legislative process hit a massive roadblock over language. From the speaker's perspective, every single Democrat voted against the museum's funding for one very specific reason. The bill specified the inclusion of biological women. The Congresswoman argues that the political left essentially demanded the inclusion of men in a women's museum, and because the bill's sponsors refused to alter the wording, the left fiercely opposed it. It highlights a very stark, real-world divide where legislative wording regarding biological reality completely derailed a bipartisan effort.
All right, on to Section 4. Forming a political army through the Republican Women's Caucus.
So how are they responding to these concerns and legislative defeats? The Congresswoman cited this exact crazy vote tally, 27-1. She explained that back when she was chairing a bipartisan women's caucus, she proposed a simple vote to stand together as women to protect girls' sports. The measure was overwhelmingly defeated, 27-1. She describes this massive loss as her light bulb moment. It proved to her that they could no longer rely on bipartisan consensus on this issue. Because of that exact vote, she decided right then and there to form an exclusively Republican women's caucus.
And they aren't just complaining about it, they are organizing. They laid out 3 precise steps. First, establish state chapters. Second, enroll every single elected Republican woman into those chapters. And third, start a unified nationwide conversation. The Congresswoman describes this as an unprecedented effort to build a literal political army of busy, elected women who are completely focused on guaranteeing equal opportunity rather than equal outcome for their daughters. It's a highly organized, direct response to all the cultural and legislative clashes we just discussed.
And that leads us to our final point, Section 5, the local election focus, the battleground moving forward.
Finally, the speakers really urge their audience to wake up to the fact that this political battle is shifting fast. It's moving away from just federal legislation in D.C. and heading heavily toward local battlegrounds. They point to a recent Supreme Court decision that essentially gives states the green light to decide on their own sports regulations. And while they view this as a win for state rights, they also warn that states like New York and California are still allowing biological boys in girls' sports. Because of this, they're arguing that local midterm elections, city commissions, and county boards are now the absolute most critical arenas for action. The fight, in their eyes, isn't just in Washington. It's happening right in your own backyard, directly impacting the policies in your community.
Which brings us to their concluding call to action. The Congresswoman says it plainly. Silence is no longer an option. Stepping back is basically giving a green light to those crazy radicals on the left. That quote perfectly captures their deep sense of urgency. They are framing this entire mobilization, from the rhetoric to the new caucuses, as a do-or-die defense of their daughters' futures. They are demanding vocal, active participation from their supporters, making it crystal clear that just sitting quietly on the sidelines is simply no longer acceptable in their movement.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a pretty massive question to ponder. Seeing how passionately these arguments are being structured into a grassroots political army, we have to ask, how deeply will this grassroots push for biological sports fairness reshape the strategy and outcomes of future state and local elections? Regardless of whether you completely agree with their platform or completely oppose it, it is absolutely clear that this ideological divide is going to be a major driving force at the ballot box. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack all of this, and as always, keep questioning and keep learning.